Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you for this very brief intro to equity in transportation. As Jasper mentioned, we are planning to have a day-long certification course in summer. So at the end of the course, each participant will be develop a equitable community engagement plan, and it's actually the plan for the summer. And so please feel free to reach out if you would like to have customized certification course for your agency or organizations. And we at UFTI T2 have the capacity to develop those type of course for you. So to start, we would like to have an idea of where our amazing audiences work. So we will have a Zoom poll and to ask you in which sector you're working. Jasper, could you please run the Zoom poll?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, looks good. Going up fast. We've got about 65% have voted. Give it another couple of seconds. Please choose one of the options, or if you are in several of the sectors or maybe a combination, you can choose more than one answer. Okay, we'll end the poll here in just a few seconds. If you haven't already voted, please go ahead.
Okay, so it seems that we have the vast majority of our audiences are in the state, regional, and local government. We have a good representation of private sector, and it seems that we don't have so many people from just 1% and one vote from nonprofit grassroots organization. Great, thank you very much for answering this question. We are very happy to uh, provide you with a bit of information that we gathered for this webinar and then continue it over the course of summer. So for agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about health and social equity in the context of transportation. And then we will introduce some of the available resources and principles and nationwide initiatives. And we talk about manifestation of equity in different phases of transportation projects. And we will have Larry Schooler, who will talk about adventures in engagement, community engagement for transportation projects. And then after Larry, we will talk about capacity building and what is equitable community outreach process look like. And then we will have Joy Goldman, who will share his experience of creating equitable community engagement processes for transportation projects. And then I will share a few case study with you and we will answer to a few questions. And at the end, I will have an overview of the second webinar and we will have a final discussion. So one of the very important thing for us as someone who works in transportation is understanding how important is our role in creating an equitable society. And if you just take a look at the transportation, you see that our works makes access to resources easier or harder for so many people across the country. One of the statements that I heard when I started working in transportation sector and really encouraged me to work and focus on equity issues in transportation was a statement from a legend Martin Luther King, who said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are we doing for others?" And it's really important to think about it in the transportation context. And you see that what we are doing every day how it can impact everyday life of others who we might not know their values. We might not have had interaction with them in our whole life. So we are not familiar and we have the opportunity and also the responsibility to reach to them because our projects is going to create an opportunity for them or even can impose burden toward them. So what is equity and how we can achieve equity and address equity in transportation? If we want to put it very simple, it will be achieving equity in transportation is fair distribution of costs and benefits for every project that we have. There's some people who are paying the cost, but not always they are getting the benefit for those projects. To put it in perspective, I have a childhood memory that really kind of encouraged me to come to the transportation field. When I was a kid, I lived in a Middle Eastern city, and they really loved highways. So they one of the projects that they made, it destroyed our neighborhood. They wanted to connect the southern part of Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, to the northern part of Tehran, and that specific project, and they didn't do any type of like environmental assessment, social impact assessment, and those type of things that we are fortunate to actually have those, but we should be careful about those even. So that project created disconnected social patches, and so many people lost their social connections. It imposed so many issues like air pollution, noise pollution to the people, and it is still happening in that specific area of the city. So it's one of the things that to have in mind, that how a very usual like project that we have in everyday life can impact someone's life without giving them any benefit. Like those neighborhoods, they didn't have access to car that much. They didn't go like to the northern part of Tehran, but the other part of the community who didn't get those impacts, and they didn't pay those costs, they were benefiting from that project. It is when you see that there is imbalance between cost and benefit, the distribution of cost and benefit in a transportation project. So what we have, like we have so many here, like in the context that we are in the United States, we have so many checklists that we use in daily practices. I worked in consultant for a few years, and I remember that there were so many of those checklists and we tried our best to use those in the best possible way. Like for example, there was one that I was responsible for a few projects, the community impact assessment form, and they were amazing questions, and we tried to do our best to kind of fulfill the requirement for that specific like checklist. But there are always something that is missing in those type of like effort, that in many instances the budget and the time that we have to complete those type of studies and those type of like evaluation in the process of transportation project, they don't match the amount of effort that you should put for that specific checklist, for example. And then I'm just insisting to say checklist because in so many instances, because of the time constraint and budget constraint, those are like type of checklists, and we don't really spend that much money, that much time to reach the people that we need to get to. So this is one of the things that we should consider when we start to work on equity in transportation. The first thing when we want to think about equity in transportation for every single project is that what types of equity is going to be impacted with this project that we are working in. I created this table based on my own experience. It's just based on my few years of experience in consultant here in the United States. But there, I will show you a table which is more general, and it was developed by Todd Littman in the next slide. So for my projects, I mainly worked with projects that impacted health equity and social equity. And when I say social equity, I mean gender equity, racial equity. And so there are so many things under the umbrella of social equity. And if we want to define health equity, there are so many definitions out there. One of those that I really think that is applicable for this webinar is the PolicyLink definition of health equity. They say health equity supports the development of accessible, efficient, affordable, and safe alternatives to car travel, and especially to driving solo, and enable everyone to walk more, travel by bicycle, and use public transportation more. It's one of the ways to see the definition of health equity in the context of transportation. And then for social equity, I am in the most of the project that I was involved, I actually worked on projects that impacted the racial equity. And the definition of racial equity, every one of you may have a personalized definition based on the project that you work with. But based on Center of Solution, Social Inclusion, racial equity is about applying justice and a little bit of common sense to a system that's being out of balance. And you see the importance of balance. And I will talk about it later when I'm talking about capacity building, how important this word is this word balance in when we are talking about equity. And then when you know what types of equity issues you're going to cause by your project, you should evaluate the potential impacts. And when I'm saying potential impact, we have two types of impact, the short-term impacts and the long-term impacts. For example, for the health equity, we may cause pollutions, so many different types of pollution, air pollution, noise pollution. And then we may contribute to climate change and impact physical activity among the residents of a specific community. We may impact mental health of the people by our projects and create a situation that safety is in danger. And when I'm saying safety, is not just safety by crime, it's safety by design that we do every day by designing our streets and our highways. It's also perceived safety, the community's perception of safety, and how what we are doing impact that perception of safety. And for example, for the social equity, the potential impacts can be social detachment, as I mentioned for the example of my childhood, and loss of efficiency, environmental justice, which we all know about that, and or creating voting disparities. It's something very familiar with so many of us because we heard about it during the last few months. And then after identifying and evaluating the type of potential impacts that our projects can have on communities that we are working with or we are working for, we should search for effective strategies to combat inequity that we are going to create. So some of those strategies can be developing transportation plans and policies that can support health equity and environmental quality, or prioritizing investment in distressed regions, or emphasizing accessibility instead of just mobility. Exactly the example that I mentioned for that highway. And one of the most important one is ensuring transparency, accountability, and meaningful participation. One of my mentors during my work in consultant told me that when you want to define a participation process or draft a participation plan, a public engagement plan, PIP, you should be transparent like a brand new mirror. And I really believe in that, which you should be transparent with the community, with the people you're going to collaborate with for that specific project, and also with the government or any other sector that you're working with. And then at the end, when you worked on the strategies, you should know and be mindful of what type of people, what categories of people you're going to impact with this project. So there are so many different types of categorization for the people and communities that we are working with. We use demographics, we use income level, we use educational level, attitudes towards specific mode of transportation, types of trips, geography, and we even use some of the tools that exist at national level, like CDC Social Vulnerability Index, that have so many different factors in it and give us a social vulnerability index for different neighborhoods and areas that we are working. So those are some of the things that kind of like steps that we should take to achieve equity in transportation project. But there is one big mistake that we sometimes make, and I see that like happening in so many projects that I sometimes get involved. It's homogenizing people using some specific categories that we have in those checklists, available checklists. Like for example, we have LEP, which is limited English proficiency. And I had projects like in Detroit, Michigan, that we had 5 different groups of limited English proficiency groups. And because of the time constraint and money constraint, we didn't have time to reach to each of those groups separately. So we create community engagement efforts, which works for all of them. But it's just homogenizing those groups. It's different when you are, I want to use that example to make it clarify, like limited English proficiency is groups that are not proficient in communicating in English. So they have language barrier. Um, in that specific project in Detroit, we had Muslim Yemenis, Muslim Lebanese, which were completely different groups. And then we had Korean American, we had a part of like Ashuri Americans who were immigrants from the Middle East. So there were different groups of people that you could find them in different places with different set of values that were not easy to like gather them in one community meeting, in one unified community outreach that we defined. But we did it because of time constraint and money constraint. But it's the common mistake. It's a big mistake that we are making in every day. And the result of that would be that so many of the people are going to be underrepresented. They're not going to be heard through those process. And there are so many like terms like that we are homogenizing people, like minorities, like we say disadvantaged transportation users or transit dependent, or we are not mindful of like different categories under those groups, which are very critical if you want to have people as a part of the process and also as decision makers for the whole process of transportation planning. So this is the example that I mentioned for like a very general example of how to achieve and evaluate transportation equity throughout the projects that you're working in. It was developed with Todd Littman, and you may all know him. He's very well known. He's Australian planner, and his focus is mainly on transportation equity. So as you see, he has types of equity in horizontal, vertical with respect to income and social classes, and vertical with respect to need and ability. And then he has impacts, which has different categories like per services, user cost and benefit, external impact, economic impact, regulation and enforcement, and then the measurement that he puts per capita, per unit of travel, and per dollar, and then categories of people, which is very similar to the one that we had. And it's good to take a look at his report. There was a report, I think the title is Evaluating Transportation Equity. It's good to take a look at that and go through this and see how he defined transportation equity and different parts of that project. So there is an exercise that I wanted you to participate right now. I would like to know that which word is the first word that comes to your mind when we talk about uplifting racial equity through transportation. So I just shared with you the, can you see that? Can you see the Mentimeter exercise? Yes? Okay, so the only thing that you do is that you just go to the menti.com and use the code that I put here. You have three options, so you can put three different words and as the answer to this question, and we will see the result here. So it would be great if you just start doing that right now, and we will see the result here as you start doing that. And if you have any question, just please send us a message in the chat box. So interesting results. Accessibility. It's quick, thank you. So we have 28 people, 30 people responded today. Great. 43. So we will have 1 more minute for that. So I think 1 minute we are done with the time for this exercise. So if you don't mind, I want to just talk a little bit about the results. It's very interesting because like the word access or and accessibility is the one that has been used and has been mentioned more than other words, which which completely like relate to the whole issue of equity, that how we prioritize mobility and accessibility is the second issue that we are going to address in so many transportation projects that we have. But hopefully it's going to be changed as we have so many mindful leaders in different sectors of transportation. Thank you very much for participating in this exercise. So let me come back to the Todd Littman table. So it was amazing. Thank you very much. That's a very good result. And I want to share with you the results of another exercise that I had for another course. It's very similar to the one that we had. So as you see that for that specific exercise, we asked the same questions, and the most frequently used words and mentioned words by the workshop participant were affordable, accessible for all, reliable transit, safe transit, livable streets. And that's very amazing because it was really related to what you mentioned. So how to achieve equity in transportation? We first need to know that what does it mean to have an equitable environment, equitable urban, suburban, rural area, considering the health status of the population. There's so many kind of measurements and tools that we can use to see how successful we are. One of them that has been used widely, and I'm sure so many of you are familiar with this, is social determinant of health. And it actually talks about factors that impact our health, and those are non-medical factors that influence the health outcome of every individual that lives in a community. And as you can see, all factors in this graph are directly or indirectly related to transportation opportunity that we make for people. And this is how impactful our work is. And for example, for social and community context and built environment, you see the impact of that as creating social isolation, anxiety, and stress of unwelcoming public spaces, for example, streets, and inaccessible built environment for disabled older adults, kids, pregnant women, and other groups, and lack of access to healthcare, specifically for critical conditions like pregnancy screening, dialysis care, and lack of reliable multimodal options in creating an environment that is not safe to breathe for kids, older adults, and so many of those impacts. Like it's very interesting to take a look at each of those. For example, education access and quality, which is directly related to transportation, economic stability. It's very important where you live, and how this where you live impact your access to opportunities and jobs, And there is, for example, for one of the case studies that I'm going to talk in a bit, there is a high mismatch, considerable mismatch between where people live and where the jobs are located, specifically for Black population across the country. And it's something that you can see like in different reports for different MPOs across the country. So it's one of the things that is created with the dysfunctional transportation system, which needs to kind of connect the dots, connect the people to jobs, opportunities, resources that are available for every one of us, and it's our rights, you know. And you have healthcare access and quality neighborhood and built environment. And for example, for the neighborhood and built environment, dysfunctional policies related to transportation can result in discouraging active living and encouraging sedentary lifestyle. And it's unfortunately impacted and minority populations and people who are considered disadvantaged, like kids and pregnant women, older adults, you know, those type of groups that we have in the community more than others. So what we can do to combat inequity. So there are some strategies to combat inequity in different levels. And you know, some of them different levels of responsiveness. Some of them are federal level strategies and tools that we can use. You know, some of them are state level. Some of them are some NGOs, initiative, and national foundation that are working towards creating an equitable environment. And transportation is always the pivotal piece of that puzzle that they're working on. So for like federal part of it, federal tools that we have Title VI, we have Civil Rights Act, we have EPA, EJ in the recent 2021 Rational Equity Executive Order that focused on creating let me just find it. Okay, so it's focused on identifying methods to assess equity and conducting an equity assessment in federal agencies. And as the last section of this executive order, we have engagement with members of underserved communities. So it's another time that we are emphasizing engagement of members of underserved communities, which is a very important thing that you should consider. And it's not just engaging them and like the later stages of transportation projects. It started in very early stages. And you may all know about participatory budgeting, which is something in a very early stages that we do in some of the cities. It's happening. And later on, I will talk about it more. And then there are state levels efforts, and for state levels efforts for different projects, they have different policies and frameworks that they develop. For example, I will provide you with an example of the Oregon Department of Transportation. They developed it's a recent one actually. They developed an equity framework for in I-205 and I-5 toll projects, which is just applied into that specific project. And then they try to customize it based on the communities that they are going to work and the geographical location and type of issues that they face. And we have institutional changes that are happening all over the country. The most recent one that I am aware of and I had communication with was Caltrans Race and Equity Action Plan. And it's in a early process, but they have done a very good job to lay out the overall process, and they are developing their strategies. And then we will have NGOs. I will talk later about Race for Wires, CSI, and Phil Principles, which Phil is a very new initiative, and the policy link that you all know about that. It has been there for so long. And so for the NGOs, initiative, and national foundations, I want to specifically introduce a newly shaped national initiative, which is called PHEAL, Planning for Health Equity, Advocacy, and Leadership. And this initiative actually shaped during the pandemic, and it focused on uplifting health equity through any type of urban, suburban, and rural intervention that we have, and transportation is always a very pivotal piece of it. And it has 3 guiding principles. It is still, in the process, and it's getting to a stage that they are developing like more something like more like a toolkit to be used by different different sectors to evaluate their commitment to uplifting health equity. It has three principles: community health and regeneration. And under community health and regeneration, they talk about uplifting health equity, different ways of uplifting health equity, developing healthy and just places, and making economic liberation essential part of any development. And then for the second principle, they have community-based advocacy, that they talk about engaging in truthful conversation with community and acknowledging that community is in charge. We're not working for community. Communities are partner in any single project that we have. And then at the end, they talk about upholding the power of data. And when I say data, every type of data, qualitative and quantitative data, the data that you can find and through regional federal sources, and the data that we should develop to better understand the context of our projects. And then the last principle is healing through leadership, which focuses on advancing racial equity and strengthening inclusion through mindful leadership. And it's very essential to understand the importance of the last principle, that what we face right now is a chronic disease of inequity, and it hasn't shaped overnight. We faced and we had a history of inequity in different sectors and in different aspects of our lives, urban, suburban, rural lives. And we are going to kind of combat this chronic disease, this chronic wound, and a healing process is needed. It's not something that we can just solve it like in 5 years. We should start little by little and make an impact and change. Actually, we are the ones who can create the foundation for a cultural change towards a more equitable social environment. And then this more equitable social environment will help us to achieve the goal of equity in transportation too. And every one of us, we have a role in it. So, and the next one is the policy link, and I'm sure so many of you are familiar with this index. It's the Racial Equity Index, and this Racial Equity Index has 9 different indicators, and I just put an example of an evaluation that they had in the right side of this slide. And as you can see in this slide, based on this index, the most prosperous U.S. regions are among the least racially inclusive regions, which is very important to have in mind and think about it. And then you can easily access to all of their evaluation through the website. And then the other one is the Race Forward Racial Equity Impact Assessment. So in the process of that assessment, they have different steps. They say that you should identify stakeholders, and then engage stakeholders, and then identifying existing racial inequities, which is very critical. When we are talking about racial equity, every single community has faced different types of racial equity, and our project also can impose and can create a situation that worsen those or even make it better. So it's very important to consider it case by case, consider it projects by projects, and then considering adverse impact of what we're doing, and then advancing equitable impact, and examining alternatives that we have, and ensuring viability and sustainability. And then the last one is the CSI for strategies to combat inequities. And the most important thing about the CSI for strategy is that it talks about breaking the taboo of talking about race. It says that let's start talking about race. And it's not something that we shouldn't do that. It's not clear yet. We don't know about that much. So let's talk it when we are working on a project that impact people's life. And it's exactly the same thing that I mentioned about that LEP term and the projects in Detroit. So we have different race among like LEP population with different set of values, with different set of problems that they face in their everyday life. How we can put them in one box and say these are LEP, and we are going to reach them just by translating everything, and it will be okay. But it's not the case. There's so many different ways that you can invite people to the table and even go to their places, and get them engaged in the whole process of transportation planning, and then even in a very early stage of scheduling and budgeting for the project. So I want to talk a little bit about this section, about the federal strategy that we have to combat inequity. The executive order for, let me see, U.S. Let me just change this. Okay, so the DOT 9097 order, which actually emphasized EJ environmental justice as a part of its mission, it's actually provide policies to promote EJ principles through the incorporation of those policies in all like DOT programs, policies, and activities. And EJ environmental justice, as you all know, is also directly related to two key priorities, which is livable communities and environmental sustainability. And both of them promote healthy neighborhoods with environmentally sustainable transportation options. So this EJ principles, they're intended to be, and also the original strategy actually, they're intended to be flexible and to be adjusted periodically in the light of like changing social environment, technological conditions, as well as like getting new insights and impact, new insights and new feedbacks occurred to the implementation. So, and then, so what happened for the DOT was that in August 2011, the Secretary of Transportation joins the head of other federal agencies in signing an EJ MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. And what they did is that they actually pledged to review and update as applicable the existing EJ strategies, and with a focus on implementation of NEPA, implementation of Title VI, and impact from climate change, impact from commercial transportation, and supporting infrastructure. And it's very important to take a look at this memorandum of understanding to better see what are the new things that they added, and then how we can apply those in our projects. And the reason that I put this actually slide here was that it was the update at the federal level, but when we want to use those updates and those like those orders and the different strategies and policies that they introduce, and we are going to use those for our local projects, regional project, we should be very mindful that we should customize them. We should kind of adapt them to the community that we are working in. So the reason that I said, when I was talking about community impact assessment, I said checklist, it was because when you use those type of policies and strategies and forms, very general forms, and without considering the context, it would be just a checklist that you do that to go from one stage of the transportation project to another stage of the transportation projects. And it doesn't mean that you didn't have contribution to uplifting equity, but you didn't have enough contribution to uplifting health equity and social equity through your projects. And then for the state level strategies, there's some states that they have toolkits, racial equity toolkits, that different sectors in the states use those and kind of adopt those for their own communities. For example, I put here the Michigan Civil Rights Commission Racial Equity Toolkit, that I'm a little bit familiar with that, and that's the reason that I'm putting it here. And there are other states that they have similar toolkits too. So they also started conversation with hinting to the importance of talking about race. And then they go to the understanding the state of your community racial equity, which is very important. Your community, which is different. I mean, I worked in my consultant life, I've worked with different groups of minorities, as we define it in a general term. And for example, I worked with different groups of Black population. I worked in Greater Cincinnati, I worked in Michigan, I worked in Indiana. Right now engaged in some projects in Florida. I worked in North Carolina. And all of those communities were belonged to one racial group, and they were Black population, but they had different set of issues, different set of concern that should be addressed. And it is something that we should consider in mind, that not all of the people who belong to one specific group are the same. Geographical locations and the type of social issues that they are facing change their situation and change their question and change their concern that we need to address through our projects. And then this toolkit talks about developing your racial equity, your customized racial equity strategic plan, and then working on getting approval and other stuff. And it's very important to be mindful about the importance of focusing on your own community and people who you are working with, and your project is going to make an impact or provide a benefit for them. This one is an example for the Oregon DOT Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, who worked on developing a equity framework for a specific project recently, for I-205 and I-5 toll projects. So they developed this equity framework just for this project. And the reason they did it was because they wanted to kind of focus on 4 specific dimensions of the projects, considering their specific community that are going to be impacted with this project. So they focused on, for example, full participation. And they said that agency accountability and transparency is the key component for these toll projects, which is very important. Transparency from the very early stage of planning. And then they focused on the other dimension that they focused on in this framework, equity framework, was affordability. And they wanted to seek exploring how to improve affordability of transportation system for the people who are going to be affected with these projects. And then the third dimension was access to opportunity. They are actively working on improving multimodal access to the region's many opportunities for the historically excluded and underserved communities that are going to be impacted with this toll project. And at the end, they worked and they are working right now on the community health aspect of this project and how they can minimize and address health, quality, and noise and traffic safety and economic impact and other potential impact on the communities. And in all of those processes, community is there. Community is a partner for those projects. So right now, I want to share the stage with Larry Scholar. He is going to open the discussion and share tips about equitable community engagement. Larry's section and also Joey's section is recorded, so please contact me or him if you have any questions using the email address that will be provided at the end of the presentation. So please join Larry for his presentation.
Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me for this short presentation. I'm Larry Schooler, and I'm with the consulting firm Kearns & West, and I also am on the faculty of the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm here to talk about equity in public engagement. And I think one of the things that I'd like to impress upon you when it comes to thinking about public engagement is that not all opportunities that we afford to the public to participate are created equal or equitable. What I mean by that is that there are lots of ways the public can often participate in decisions that are going to affect them. But when we give people, say, 3 minutes at a microphone, that's not an opportunity that a lot of people want to take advantage of or can take advantage of based on their availability of time to wait around hours to speak for 3 minutes, or the means to compose a speech to deliver in that fashion. A lot of us are much more inclined to talk in a smaller group setting or even anonymously. And so we have to consider how the opportunities we provide for people to participate are truly going to be equitable across different socioeconomic levels, different parts of a community, different levels of resources, different amounts of political power. Those are all considerations that we have to have. So for me, equitable public engagement is truly enabling all those affected by a decision to affect that decision. So first of all, making sure that there's actually a reasonable way for someone to affect whatever the decision might be. And that should be regardless of whether they have the time and means to go to that public hearing, and an acknowledgement that we have a lot of inequities in the world of public engagement right now. We oftentimes expect a lot of the citizenry, a lot of our public, to participate in decisions that matter, and we need to be conscientious about lowering barriers to participation. So my hypothesis in this matter is that if we leverage multiple platforms, multiple forms of technology, the public will participate. And I think of that as both lower and higher forms of technology. I think a lot of us interchange internet with technology, and the reality is we still have tools like television, radio, telephone, text messaging, and we can't forget that for probably a quarter or more of the American population, high-speed internet access remains a major challenge or an impossibility. So we're not just talking about getting online here. But I think that it's important to consider a system of qualified and well-trained personnel to make this work, and to be thinking in terms of both principles, process, tools, and technique. In traditional public engagement, you'll often have that one single public meeting. Equitable public engagement requires us to think about multiple points of entry, both in terms of the duration of a process, a decision-making process, and in terms of the type of participation someone can have. There are all kinds of different ways that we can enable people to participate. We can orchestrate sort of a massive conference call and even dial out to a large audience and allow people to participate by phone. We can transmit an opportunity to give input anonymously via text message. We can take the contents of a public meeting, put it into a physical box or a PDF download, and allow people to host their own meetings and share the results with us. We can stage pop-ups where we go where there's a lot of foot traffic in a community and just catch people as they go by. We can use what we often call traditional media to host meetings over television and radio and encourage call-ins or other forms of participation. And then we can also use online tools for those who have the means to participate online and who might not have the scheduling flexibility to show up in person. So my advice is that you should start by doing a very robust stakeholder analysis and asking stakeholders how they either like or want to engage based on whatever the project is and whoever the stakeholders might be. Then determine the best process that you want to use for your engagement. Determine the tools that fit the needs of the project and those of the stakeholders, and then deploy those tools, evaluate, and modify based on what your evaluation finds. So above all else, I encourage you to know all of your stakeholders and understand how they engage, and then tailor your engagement design to those stakeholders, mindful of the fact that stakeholders have all different levels of courage and political power and resources. And in your particular case, you may want to take a totally different approach on one project than you would for another, or a totally different approach for one group of stakeholders or one community than you would for another community. Thanks for listening.
So thank you very much, Larry, for speaking from your experience. So the missing piece actually in equitable engagement of people in transportation projects is capacity building, how we work on capacity building and kind of empower community to be a part of the projects and even collaborator of the projects. There are so many strategies that kind of help us to understand that what is the effective type of community involvement projects and what we should do to create those effective, processes. One of the set of strategies that I'd like to share is one of the most comprehensive ones that was developed with Safe Routes Partnership. So they presented 7 strategies that kind of help creating those type of environment for community engagement. The first strategy was exactly the things that Larry mentioned, identifying the engagement process, what you want to get from this engagement process. determining if the goal of the outreach is like just sharing information in a one-way manner, or whether you want to have community feedback and ideas be incorporated to the projects and actually impact the whole process of the projects. It's very important to understand that what is your goal for doing that. And then second is building personal relationship with target population. Sometimes in some of the project, we have community leaders and community members who are engaged with the government and with the different entities and agencies that are working on those on different transportation projects. And we can use the power of their kind of close relationship with the community, and they can be the ambassadors of the project. But it's not always like that. So sometimes we need to make personal connection with the members of the community to create those opportunities. And at the same time, we need to partner with diverse agencies and organizations. So it's very important that for us to partner with organizations that have existing relationship with the target population, but at the same time, there are many groups of people who are not engaging in the local organizations or not members of those local organizations. There are other strategies for that, which one of those is kind of inviting and members of the community to the table instead of just working with the local organizations. And at the same time, understanding that the people are going to dedicate their time, effort, and spend, their and also their relationships to the project is very important. So providing a stipend in contract to the people who are community members who are going to work with us is very important. There are so many very successful examples all over the country. One of the examples that I recently heard about it was Durham in North Carolina, Durham Planning Department, who requested city funding to hire 30 community members to conduct equitable engagement on the city comprehensive plan. And it's happening in some other parts of the country too. But it's very important to understand that they're going to spend their time, they're going to give you their, whatever they know about the community. So they should be paid, and their work should be valued in a way. So volunteer, engagement in those type of activities is something that should be kind of revised, should be kind of revisited, and then something like the City of Durham approach would be helpful. And then the other thing is that increasing accessibility. So encouraging participation via language translation, giving gift card incentive or transit passes or childcare events are good. But at the same time, we should be mindful that if the vast majority of the people that are going to get engaged in the process are working, some of the scheduling doesn't work for them. And at the same time, some of the venues may not feel comfortable for them. And creating a welcoming atmosphere is very important. Even for me as a planner, sometimes going to City Hall for a neighborhood level projects doesn't feel that welcoming. And I feel more comfortable if they ask those questions for me in my neighborhood, in a community center, those type of thing. And there are so many people who are not going to participate in those type of like meeting or workshop or whatever we call those type of events in a government office or auditorium or city hall. And then the other thing which is very important is thinking about how to grow community capacity. So it's not just it's not enough to just engage the community, but it's also important to leave something behind. It's really important to create and develop opportunities for training and funding to help develop skills within the members of the community. And then understanding that we need to maintain a presence in the community beyond the project scope. It's not the first and the last one project that we have with this community. We're going to work, we are working with the city, we are working with the state. So it's good to have it in mind when we start the process that we need to maintain a presence in the community. And one of the best things that so many cities do is that they create ambassadors, kind of educate ambassadors of the city to the community. And I'm going to talk about one example of that. So one of the example of of that is the City of Seattle Department of Neighborhood People's Academy of Community Engagement. So it's different from, so we have like in other cities, we have Citizens Academy, which is a different one. This People's Academy of Community Engagement is mainly focused on community engagement. And what they do is that actually it's a civic leadership development, and they focus on creating meaningful networking and educating people about local government, which this section happened in Citizen Academy too. And then they teach about how to connect with and influence local decision makers. So they kind of like provide people with a set of soft and hard skills. And these people's like people who are educated in this People's Academy for Community Engagement, they are actually the ambassadors of the city to the community. The other reason that I put this slide here, which is a photo of the City of Seattle Department of Neighborhoods YouTube page, was because I want to mention something that I think it's missing in some of our cities, but not all of them. I see that like it's happening all over the country. It's that sometimes for some of our agencies, investing in a good graphic designer, design position for us may not seem as valuable as like hiring like a data scientist or a technical staff that is going to work on technical things related to transportation projects. Which for me, that doesn't make sense as someone who is working with community engagement, because if you have the data and you don't know how to present it to the community, there will not be any impact. There's no impact of those data. They will not understand what's going on within the city, and nothing is going to encourage them to get engaged. And then the way that, like, for example, City of Seattle is an example, and there are so many amazing things going on across the country. I'm familiar with one other, which is the City of San Jose. And the reason that I'm familiar with that, because in the year that they were awarded for their community engagement effort, I was the judge for the American Planning Association National Award. So I was reviewing so many different programs, and I came across that, and I was like, this is amazing. And they got the award for their community engagement effort. So there are cities that are doing that, and City of Seattle specifically, and I reviewed their work during the last few months. They are doing a great job in presenting different like rules and regulation and things that are related to the daily activities of the city to their citizens through different platforms. One of the platform is the YouTube, and they have it in different languages and with a very good and informative graphics that even you don't want to pay attention. You just see the first image, and you're like, okay, I should see that. And those are very short videos, like 2-minute videos, 1.5 minute videos, and those are very informative and very very useful for the citizen to understand that how it is going, with the community engagement, with the transportation project, with the different types of like projects that are going on in the city. Different departments are doing different things, which also the Department of Transportation kind of work across different sectors. So it has like information related to so many different types of projects that can impact different neighborhoods. And you may have Department of Transportation in your city too. So many cities have this type of department. The question here is that I talked about capacity building and the importance of capacity building and the importance of having presence beyond the projects in the community. And it all referred to what is capacity building and how we should do that. There are different types of capacity building. I just provide you with different examples, and then we will have more time for the day-long certification course to talk about each of those and see how we can work on each of those and how it relates to transportation projects, different types of transportation projects. This one is a regional level example of capacity building. So in the regional level of capacity building, we mainly support community-based organization through actions. So what we do exactly is that we actually go to the and see what's going on in the grant and identify local assets. And those assets are neighborhood groups, local institution in the community, even individuals who are involved in different key activities for those community-based organizations. And then we connect those and mobilize those. And mobilizing means them engaging those in a process of connection, organizing, and orchestrating like instrumental links among them, and kind of link them with other organizations and then train individual within organization and within the community. So there's so many different ways of seeing that. If we want to look at it like in two different ways, actually supporting community-based organizations through actions can be like helping out regional grassroots organizations that provide direct services to the community, and whether those like helping include like providing them with technical support, providing them with like helping them with the organizational planning, or providing them with the board training or staff training, or even providing them for with more funds for additional staff, or creating a new department or new section in their organizations. And then the second way of seeing that is direct service to individuals that live in the community and interact and work with this grassroots and community-based organizations. And actually it calls like leadership building kind of that we can do when we are talking about regional level capacity building. But there is another type of capacity building, a different scale of it, which is a neighborhood level capacity building. And the question is that, how we as planner, policymaker, engineer, and whoever work in public and private sector or and nonprofit sectors, who is involved in neighborhood level capacity building, and why it's important to understand that how it works. So for me, as a planner, as a scholar, as someone whose passion is addressing equity in transportation, understanding the equity of neighborhood level capacity building leads me when I'm starting working on public engagement phase for a transportation project. It really helped me to understand the dynamics of a neighborhood, the dynamics of the relationship between different members of that neighborhood. And there are examples of how cities help the process of capacity building at neighborhood level. And like one of the examples is that like the way cities engage in neighborhood level activities through their Department of Neighborhoods, activities. Or for example, like City of Detroit, Department of Neighborhood, they help residents form clubs and community associations and lead community capacity building activities across the metro area. And just as an example, like City of Detroit provides so many different types of grants for neighborhood level affairs that is like based on community members' effort. And one of the good things about those type of interactions is that there's so many issues that communities are living with in daily basis, and forming those community associations, small or very big. I mean, in Detroit, you can see like a community association of like 3 people, or a very big one. There's so many different types and different size and different level of impact community association in Detroit metro area. And they are the ones who are living with daily issues that people face, and they are the ones that can provide answer and help the situation to make better. And the city kind of partnering with them and provide them with resources that they are lacking, and then ease the process and make it better for them to be impactful at the neighborhood levels and kind of improve their neighborhoods, which is very essential to understand when you're working with a community. When you're working for a community engagement plan for a transportation project, it's important to see that how individuals work together and how those relationships shape. And another example is the Seattle neighborhood Department of Neighborhood, that they also provide so many different type of funds to the projects that developed and implemented by the community members. So it's very important to understand that like this scale of capacity building, understanding that is important, because it helps you to be mindful when you start a public participation plan for a transportation projects. And we should be mindful, because otherwise we cannot encourage people to be a part of the process and lead us and collaborate with us in a transportation project. And this scale of capacity building help us to understand that why individuals want to participate. So what is, actually, it's very important to understand that what is an individual desire to participate in a community engagement process for a project, like the project that we are involved in daily basis. First of all, for recognition. Second, for respect from others. It just happens, it just happens when you are engaged in shaping and forming and, for good your community. It just happens. You will have more respect from others. And for an identifiable rule within community to build meaningful relationship. And then the last and the most important one, individuals participate in the community engagement phases of the transportation project that can happen throughout the transportation project to see the results as an outcome of their action, which is very essential when you're working with the community. And then if they see that, they will engage more and more for the future projects. And you actually achieve the goal of create capacity building within the community. You actually created, if they see that, you actually created kind of ambassador, community engagement ambassador within that specific neighborhoods or city or regions that you're working, and you can use that capacities for future projects. So if we want to know how to maximize individual engagement in our projects, it's very important to understand how that relationship between different individuals work, and understanding that people are not going to be participate in a meeting that is happening in a city hall is not that easy if you don't know what type of individual you are working with, who are your it happens sometimes. Like I had some community engagement in city halls in local church that so many people participated, and then when I compare it with others that I just had 2 or 3 people participate in that public engagement workshop, I understand that okay, there are different type of people. Like for one of those projects, I remember that like the vast majority of the people in that neighborhood that we were working with, they were white people, and white people from a high income level, strata, which is a different story when you work with like Black population in a neighborhood that they lack some of the resources, and there are so many issues related to transportation, transit, and those type of things going on in their community. If there is a lack of trust in some of the communities, and you don't see those lack of trust in others, so it's our duty, it's our responsibility to build that trust to a kind of preparation for the community engagement process. And this capacity building is type of those preparation for community engagement. And then we have different level of capacity building, which is a federal level of capacity building. This example is just is an example of the USDOT PCP program, which is for the USDOT Intelligent Transportation Systems. And they kind of connected training and academic organizations, state and regional, local association, professional organizations like APTA, like ITE, like NHI, those type of organization. And then they're right now are everyone's source for workforce and professional development in ITS. And they're, as they put it, they are primary mechanism for educating and public sector transportation workforce about ITS, and they have a very good source of database online available for everyone. I just want to mention one of the projects that I recently saw on their database that is related to the topic of our webinar, which is called Equitable Congestion Pricing, and it was a case study of congestion pricing around the world. And among their 4 recommendations, the first one was creating meaningful community engagement activities. And they said that this meaningful and ongoing community engagement activities should happen before and after implementation of the congestion pricing. And it's something that is needed to make the process more equitable, And there was a statement at the end of the report that I really liked it, and I think that it's applicable to so many different projects, which said pricing structure that what is like equitable pricing structure? It is pricing a structure that strike a balance between efficiency and equity, which is very important for every one of us. So with that said, I'm going to pass it to Joy Goldman. He will talk about his experience of community engagement in transportation projects.
Hi, I'm Joey Goldman with Kearns and West. Why is equity important for transportation investments? It's important for many reasons, and we want to make our communities fully accessible. We want to serve the best interests of a community, and we want to make sure we're investing in the right technologies and modes for different populations. At the same time, we want to ensure that we're not doing other things, not impacting one community over another based on who lives there, or putting a disproportionate burden on a community. Let me give you some examples. If we're going to build a new transit maintenance facility, historically in a lot of communities, this has meant building in a lower income, often minority community. Are you installing the same brand new bus shelters along your minority versus non-minority bus routes? Are your sidewalks and crosswalks equally accessible and contiguous in one part of the town versus another? I'm working on a new high-speed rail project, and the outreach that I'm doing, I wonder if I'm going to be disproportionately impacting non-English speaking communities. These are all equity issues and examples of how these simple investments and plans can be very impactful on one community, is part of why it's so important to focus on equity and outreach and engagement. We are at our best when we are mindful about the outreach we're doing, and when we understand that as planners or engineers, we have the privilege of coming into a community, making changes, and then leaving. So a few things to think about, because being mindful on equity issues is the right thing to do. If I am not a person of color going into a community of recent immigrants, I'm there in an authority role, and it can feel like I'm the one imposing something on a community, even if I think they're really going to benefit. Being aware of that perception is particularly valuable, and taking the time to understand the community, its history, its community assets, its representatives, and how people use existing transportation. I might think transportation is really important, but nutrition, employment, education, public safety, these could be much more important issues for community members. This is a key element of understanding why equitable engagement is important. In addition to it being the right thing to do, there are in many places state or local guidance on equitable engagement, as well as federal guidance. Examples include NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, EJ guidance, Environmental Justice Guidance, which requires us to identify and address disproportionate effects on minority and low-income populations, and that requires engagement. Title VI is a civil rights tool for enforcement, and it provides guidance on determining whether there might be disproportionately high or adverse effects, and if so, conducting outreach and developing a plan to address them. If you don't, certain types of federal funding could be at risk. One other, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was signed into law in 1990, and its civil rights law prohibits discrimination based on disability. So we know there are statutory requirements, and we know that equitable engagement is the right thing to do. How do you get started? To conclude this brief presentation, I'm going to highlight just 3 quick examples. When I was working on a school transportation project a couple of years ago, several months before we even began engagement, we assessed the proportion of students on the free and reduced lunch program, met with each school and the various community organizations associated with the schools, including local churches, neighborhood organizations. These were our conduits to the community members. These are the folks to collaborate with, and the folks that we, in some ways, were trying to provide funding to support their engagement effort. It's also important to develop a strategic process to get meaningful input and responsiveness in general. And this is part of a much longer presentation. When I worked on a regional transit plan in the Eastern Sierra in California, I developed an engagement plan after holding one-on-one meetings with tribal elders, because we wanted to understand which activities my team could join to bring people together, and to understand who actually spoke for the people I wanted to engage. So a good engagement plan is about knowing your objectives and asking the right questions. This photo on my final slide here shows a community walk where we asked local residents to give us a tour of their neighborhood and tell us what impacts of a new high-speed rail line in San Jose, California they were most concerned about. We got some really valuable input by listening to and talking with the people who represent and live in the community. So go engage, being consistent and deliberate and recognizing the diverse experience of the participants can absolutely empower the community you're working with to take their rightful place at the table. And that's what equitable engagement for transportation is really all about. Good luck.
Okay, thank you very much, Joy Goldman. So I think that we need to pass on a few slides and go to the exercise. Actually, I'm going to share the case studies with you in an email after the webinar. We don't have time to talk about it, and I prefer to start with the exercises. So this exercise actually is based on one of the studies that was presented in the TRB 2021. It was a poster presentation, and it was about the approaches, different approaches that transportation practitioners have to address equity in their daily practices. And the answers are based on transportation practitioners' input, and it was a set of interviews with the transportation practitioners, and they mentioned the least frequently used strategy to address equity and the most frequently used strategy to address equity in their daily practices. And as you can see, using qualitative and quantitative data is among one of the least frequently used one, and collaborating with other organizations and sectors is among one of the most frequently used strategy to address equity. So we will have a few questions, and we want to know about your experience. And Jasper is going to share the poll with you. The first one is about which organization have you collaborated with for your project. You can choose multiple choices and let us know that by which organization is the ones that you collaborate with for your daily practices. So it's an interesting result. It seems that to this moment, it seems that educational organizations, universities and college are the one that most of you work with for your projects. And it's great to see grassroots organizations also are one of the most rich. Okay, so we have 64 voted, and educational organizations and universities are 70%, and nonprofit grassroots organizations 67, and then we have Department of Health and healthcare agencies and human resource management at the end of the list. So the questions is about the type of data that you use for your daily practices. So it's have you ever integrated non-transportation related data into your project? And if yes, you just mention which type of project you use most. And you can choose multiple choices too. So it seems that for transportation practitioners who are participating in this short webinar, it seems that these two are also among the most frequently used strategies. So many of you worked with different other organizations, collaborate with other organizations, and integrated non-transportation data into your daily practices. Thank you very much. And the result of this polling will be shared with you in an email afterwards, and you will have it for your record. So the next one, we want to know that if your organization have policy in place for community engagement in early budgeting and planning process. This is great to see. The vast majority of you have, your organizations actually have policy in place for community engagement in early planning process. Thank you. Thank you very much for answering to this question. I think we have the last question, which is, in which of the following stages of transportation planning process your organization asks for community input? And we have budgeting and scheduling, policymaking, project development and implementation, and evaluation and monitoring. It seems that most of you work in organizations that have the community engagement phase mostly used for project development and implementation. But we also have evaluation and monitoring, and then also policy making. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank you very much for being with us for this very, very brief journey. We cannot talk about equity in transportation in just like 1.5 hours, but we tried our best, and I hope that you provide us with your feedback, and then we make it better for future certification courses that are going to be available hopefully in summer. And we are going to gather the results of these exercises and sending to you afterward in a few weeks after this webinar. And then for March webinar, we are going to dig deeper into community engagement phase for transportation project and start about how and when we should kind of invite community into the table. And we will start with a few examples from MPOs and then principles of the community engagement. And then we will talk about definition of participatory governance. And at the end, we will have some case studies that we use to design a community process together. So you will be asked to answer 5 pivotal questions about your experience as a practitioner in regard to community engagement for the next webinar. So I'm eagerly looking forward. We are all eagerly looking forward to see you on March 31st. Please feel free to email me or T2, UFTI T2 with any question that you have or any issue that you think that we should address and talk about in the next webinar, or any comments that you have for the certification course that we are going to offer hopefully in summer. And thank you very much for being with us. Stay healthy and happy.